Before I get started with the presentation, I just wanted to say, obviously, I'm videotaping this by myself, so there's no students to interact with, but if I was actually teaching them this, I would be interacting with them, asking them questions about our subject, which is going to be Roman theater, and just sort of a general interaction with the students as we went through it. But I did make up a worksheet that has some general questions going over it that pertains to what I think is their grade level. And I'm also including the PowerPoint attached in the email as well, because you might not be able to see the presentation in the video I'm making, but I wanted to put up the PowerPoint behind me as well, just so it's a little more cohesive for the video's purpose. I know we're limited by hardware, but I want to do the best I could with what I had to present to you. So, we shall just get started. Alright guys, today our subject is Roman theater. Now, Roman theater is one of the most exciting things to study because it's kind of encompasses a lot of different aspects of ancient Rome that are very popular, and it's stuff that you see in movies like Gladiator, and you see in other aspects of daily life as well, and our daily life, because we see things in stadiums that have been influenced back from these ancient Rome buildings. And the theater that we have today, as well as television and all that stuff, comes from ancient Rome and ancient, from Greek as well, theater. So, in this first image we have here is a theater located in Basra. Now this is I use this image because it's kind of fairly representative of what an amphitheater in Rome would be like. We will get into amphitheaters a little later on in the lesson, but this is a good start for you guys to sort of get a feel for what it would be like, get a feel for the size of it, and the sheer sort of extreme and epic proportions that is the Roman theater. Now, there are different types of Roman theater, and one of the main things about Roman theater is that it actually expanded upon Greek ideas. Greek theater was very more centered on drama and centered on actors, but Roman theater expanded upon that and started including more physical things like gladiators, chariot races, and something called naumachia, which was big naval battles, which we'll get into as well a little bit. We'll touch on that. Also, you had in theaters, you had religious festivities in the sense of Roman gods that would be celebrated in these theaters. People would go there and actors would be there to celebrate them, and they would celebrate the gods, which often represented different parts of the Roman season. So the main things to sort of take away from this portion for you guys is just sort of the different variety of types of theater events. So you have your races, your fights, your naval battles, of course gladiators, and your gods that would be celebrated. On top of what we know as today as comedies, drama, and tragedies, which to you guys who watch television, these directly influence that. So you can look back at our Roman friends and see how they directly influence television today as well. Now, the Romans, like the Greek, had actors. The word in Latin for actors that they used, that they called their actors, there's actually two different words that they used, one of which sounds familiar to us, which is mimes, and histriones, which was more of the higher tier actors. The mimes were usually the lower actors and would be often female, whereas the other histriones would be the males. Now, actors, as far as that goes, this was heavily based upon Greek tradition, unlike the more physical events of the Roman theater. Now, acting involved mainly two types of acting, which would be tragedy. Tragedy was a very slow-based acting form where actors would come out onto the stage in the amphitheater, and the actors would deliver very slow performances, often not with a lot of interaction with the audience. So it would mainly be what we think of today as sort of like a play, but it would be very slow. The comedies which would be still like a play often, would be a lot more fast in their performance and often interact with the audience. So they would start to interact with everyday people. And this is something that you see throughout history, not just the Roman time. You see this in medieval history, and we see this especially in Shakespeare. So you can see a direct correlation between the ancient Romans, Shakespeare, all the way up to today in theaters and on television as well, because this is something that directly influenced it. So we can look back at the Romans. So our takeaway from this, as far as actors go, are the two types, the histrionics and the mimes. The mimes, of course, being the lower class of actors, as well as the two different forms of acting, comedy, tragedy, and of course, which I don't have listed on here, but drama, which is big amongst the Greeks. These two mainly the main Roman things that you need to focus on. Now, we get into theaters, because the theaters are what house these different events for the Romans. And you guys really should focus on these, because once you can start to associate the different types of events with the theaters, it's really easy to remember the different types of events that occurred, just simply based on the different styles of theater. The Circus Maximus, which is one of the most popular theaters next to the Colosseum in Rome, is where they had horse races and chariot races, and they had big fights as well, mainly sort of wrestling and that type of thing, which was less, it didn't happen as much there, it was mainly racing. The Circus Maximus was constructed in about 600 BC, and it held about 60,000 spectators, which is roughly the same size of the amphitheater Colosseum. Now, as I stated, the Circus Maximus is shaped for racing. We'll look at a larger picture of this later so you guys get a better understanding, but these two pictures here I have included so that they highlight the difference, because the Circus Maximus was more of a squished together oval shape. So it's very elongated, so that the horses and the racers would have to take a little longer to go around, whereas the Colosseum and the amphitheaters were more of a circle and what later became a half circle for the orchestra. And this was mainly so you could be closer to it, you could see stuff, and you get more of the actors that we talked about before with comedies and dramas. Now, amphitheaters, the first amphitheater, permanent amphitheater, was constructed in about 46 BC. The Colosseum being constructed in about 80 AD. Now, these amphitheaters and the Colosseum itself could hold, around 50,000. That's around what that Colosseum could hold. So that was a large amount of spectators. And in the Colosseum, you would get things like trapdoors, hidden areas underneath where the performers would be or where the gladiators would be. And this, you could keep secret things that either performers didn't know about, or they could store animals there that would come out. And in the case of the Naumachia that we mentioned briefly earlier, and I'll go into a little more, this allowed for water to be drained out of through aqueducts and through these sort of hidden channels in the theaters easily, so that it could be filled and drained pretty quickly. Now this is a larger picture of the Circus Maximus. You can see its sort of elongation. Now the Circus Maximus, guys, could also hold about 12 chariots at a time, so you could get some fairly big and epic chariot races and battles in this. As you can see, it still houses quite a bit of people because of its size. It's just more elongated than your typical amphitheater. So this is something that's less inspired theaters today. This is more, if you were to compare it to something today, you would look at a horse track today, and that would be more like this. It's very sort of limited in its use compared to the Colosseum and the amphitheaters, which is one of the reasons why you see more things such as the Naumachia and such as the gladiator battles and animal fights happen in amphitheaters and the Colosseum. whereas the Circus Maximus was very sort of limited in its use. This is that amphitheater we looked at earlier that's located in modern-day Syria. Now this is a very good example of what amphitheaters were like then and why they were better for things such as acting, for those tragedies and comedies we mentioned earlier, because it was you were seated above the stage, which was in a pitted position. So your little actors who would be doing their tragedies and comedies would be on the stage, which would be below the spectators. So if you think of like a stadium today, like you were at a big football stadium, the football players are out down below and you're circling them. That's what the amphitheater is like, and that's what the Colosseum was like. Now this amphitheater is a lot like most amphitheaters in that the orchestra and the amphitheater itself was a half circle. And this is something the Romans really liked to do when they built their amphitheaters. So you would have your stage and you would have your spectators in a half circle instead of surrounding them. So less like the Circus Maximus, which pretty much surrounded them. Now in amphitheaters, with the tragedies and comedies, you would also have a lot of musicians. And in these different areas, now that you had more space behind the stage, you could have musicians playing along with the different performances. And as I mentioned before, the Naumachia could happen in there. Not particularly in this one, but bigger ones like the Colosseum, where there would be a lot more space for water to be held down in the pit. They could bring in big ships and have naval battles. Now, let's get on to the Naumachia since we were talking about it. Now, what I want you guys to take away about the Naumachia is that it's still a real battle. So even though I say it's staged, it's still real in the sense that people still fought and were killed. Mainly the people who would be fighting in these types of battles would be slaves and prisoners. And what they would do is they would drain the Colosseum, or where they would be holding the Naumachia, and they would fill it with water. So, sorry about saying that was drained. They would fill it with water, and they would put boats in there, and they would stage epic battles. And either of these battles would they would reenact history, or it'd just be some celebratory battle, but they would reenact epic battles in which people would actually get hurt and killed. And these would often be bloodier than gladiator battles. So for you people who are into that sort of action, this is where the action occurred. And it's something you guys don't hear about much in Roman history. And you don't see it a lot in films. Gladiator battles often get the sort of highlight and the coolness. But I personally think the Naumachia is one of the coolest parts of Roman history, and especially Roman theater, because you can just imagine the spectacle of going to a Colosseum and going to an amphitheater and seeing it one day have gladiators and just be completely arid and dry and all these trapdoors, and the next day you go and it's just full of water with a big naval battle. In fact, the word Naumachia itself means naval assault in Latin. So that's just a little something extra for you guys to take away. The main thing you should know about Naumachia and things like gladiator battles and things like that would be that they would often use slaves and prisoners, and it would be a fight where people would be killed. So this is not, it would be entertainment, but at the same time it's a very dangerous form of entertainment. Much like the chariot races were often a dangerous form of entertainment. The Romans were very physical and was less just about the comedies and tragedies like the Greek, and more onto these physical activities. So if you were to compare it to modern day, we're nowhere near as dangerous, obviously, as the Romans were, but we're still pretty physical in football and stuff like that. So this is the Roman equivalent of those sorts of activities, which would be the gladiator battles and the Naumachia, which would be our large naval battles. And the first one was held by Caesar. Now, we're getting to the end of the lesson, which is the fall of the theater. So you guys might be wondering, how did the theater end? Which, is a good question. Well, we all know that the Roman Empire ended. It came to an end, obviously. All the stuff is there. We can still see the ruins, the Colosseum, and see other bits of it around. But the Romans aren't there. There's other countries there, and the parts of it are in England, and you can see parts of the different things, like we saw the amphitheater in Syria that we saw earlier. Well, one of the main reasons that Roman theater itself died out is because of the rise of Christianity. Now, when the Christians started rising, and that became a very big thing in Rome, the Christians started opposing the Romans' belief in these sort of what we call pagan gods. So sort of the Roman mythology. The Christians started questioning it, and it became less popular for festivals to happen, obviously, because there's all this protest against these Roman gods. There'd be less need for these festivals, so those sort of just died away. And in 404 AD, there was no more gladiator fights, which, as we mentioned earlier, was a big thing for the Romans. So once that stopped happening, and these sort of physical matches stopped happening, things started dying down. And like I said, it has a lot to do with Christianity. And then the Roman Empire itself started to die out. You had the best way to think about this is there were problems on the inside and problems on the outside. On the outside, you had barbarians attacking Rome, and you had Rome dealing with those issues. On the inside, Rome was dealing with Christianity and the rise of Christianity, which was challenging some of the core concepts of Rome that we just went over, such as these sort of battles to the death, and these festivities where you celebrated pagan gods. So now the Roman Empire is collapsing, the Roman theater is starting to die off. So this has been a very, very brief summary and lesson on Roman theater, but we were able to cover all of the main aspects that you guys should be able to remember and be able to convey back to me when I'm questioning you guys on your worksheets and on tests. Just remember, when you guys are going over this, the main things that you guys should be focusing on, the main categories are the types of the theaters. We went over the Circus Maximus and the amphitheater, as well as who was in those, the Naumachia, the naval battles, the gladiators, the races, and which theaters those belong to, and then sort of how those theaters and Roman theater and entertainment came to an end. And if you guys can demonstrate that to me, as all the stuff we went over in that fashion, and kind of tie that all together, you should be able to do pretty good on those tests. But overall, it's one of the most exciting parts of Rome, I think. And Roman theater is one of the most exciting and happening moments of Rome itself. And that's where, for you people who are into action and sort of glory and battle, Roman theater is all about that. So I hope you guys took a lot away from that, and I hope to hear what you guys think, and when you do your worksheets, make sure you fill out the correct answers and try to do your best from that and do your readings on the subject. And that's all I have for you guys today. Alright, thank you.